Well, g'day everyone, and welcome to the Just Your Average show number 2. We are here, we are loud, and we are proud, and we are talking all things gummy sharks. Tonight we're going to be focusing on Westernport Bay, Port Phillip Bay, and also mixing up with land-based, because we know we have many land-based fishos as a part of the Just Your Average fishos community. Like always, a little bit unscripted, pretty much unedited, and unsponsored and unbiased. So I reckon let me introduce a couple of our people this evening. Good old mate, Anthony Saric. How are you, mate? And it's good to see you back with us, helping me talk Port Phillip Bay. Mate, how are you this evening?
Yeah, not too bad.
Yes,
Dying to get out for a fish.
As we all are, I'm sure. Justin, great to see you again, mate. Thank you very much for joining us in week 2 and coming to talk all things Westernport and land-based.
Yep, thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me on again. So, yeah, it should be interesting.
No worries. And we hope to be joined by Shaun from Think Big Charters, who's going to be joining us a little bit later in the show to talk some Westernport fishing. Had some family difficulties today, so we'll get him on as soon as we can, when we can. But it doesn't really matter because we've got a load of cracking information to come back to you with. So let's get right into it. Gummy shark fishing. Everyone wants to catch flake. It's tasty. It's reasonably easy to go out and target, well, most people think anyway, but not everyone catches consistently. So what we thought we might do is break it down as best as we can, talking about gear, areas and tides and bits and pieces in each bay about what we do. First things first, before we get into all the analytics of fishing for gummy sharks, we need to make sure that your gear to catch one is right. Because before you choose your fishing day, personally, I always aim on what is the quality of my tackle. Is it all rigged and ready to go? So if I do have a fishing day that comes to me because we have a change in the weather or it can happen overnight in an instant, fantastic. The boat's ready to go, the rigs are ready to go. All we need to do is actually jump in the car and head to the ramp. I don't know about you guys, but I love spending my Friday nights rigging tackle so that we definitely don't have any tackle failures, because when you are latched onto a pretty decent gummy shark, it's all the 1%ers that help. Anth, how would you agree?
Absolutely. I've even got to the point now where I'm using an FG more than I am a double uni, because I've had less breakages with it as well and can run a longer leader chocolate.
Yeah, cool. So for me, most people know that I'm quite a bit of a Shimano dude, and I love, and I've spoken and written about in many gummy articles, the T-curve blue waters, which is quite an old staple in the Shimano rod factory. However, we've been changing it up recently because in the last catalogue of Shimano, the whole T-curve water series had been deleted, and I was like, oh my God, Shimano, what are you doing to me? I can't get replacement blue waters. Do I need to change brands? And then what they did was revive the Terez Black series. And through, working with Ian down at the tackle shop, he said, you've got to try these Terez Black 72Ms, really supple in the tip, plenty of power. I think I've got one here that I can show some people. It's pretty hard to show on screen. But this is our gummy stick of choice at the moment. The Saragossa 10, 50-pound braid, Terez Black 72M. So TZS 72M. This is a brilliant rod. Anthony, how you find it? Because you've come from different rod brands. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I've come from high-end brands. I'm loving these new sticks. Plenty of power, good in the tip. To the point where I've been using them offshore, flatty drifting, and still being able to pick up bites, even though they're a 20 to 50-pound rod.
Absolutely. I think you were also rigging them on the tuna and on the kingfish. So some of those tuna reports that you put through to us, you would use those rods, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct. So I did all my tuna fishing this year, all skirts, and I even ran a couple of deep divers on them as well. They bend a little bit under the deep divers, but still worked fine. We even used them on the King's jigging this year.
Yeah, they're really, really strong and versatile rod. Now, they're a one-piece rod. They've got a carbon weave over the top. And again, we're not sponsored here. This isn't a show about Shimano by any means. We've fallen in love with them because they're, being able to use a versatile rod across different fish species saves you money in the long term. And I know that there's been a lot sold out of the Complete Angler Ringwood store for that very purpose. I think we've got some footage here, producer Ben, of Anthony getting one bent on a shovel nose ray, I'm pretty sure. Holds up pretty well.
Everyone. Justin from Just Your Average Fishers here with old mate. And we are putting to the test the new 20 to 50 pound Terror 7'2" one piece. And we've got a shit fish on, probably a ray, something like that. And Anthony is purposefully bending the hell out of it, just to see how much hurt we can put on this rod. He's bending into the butt a bit. He's not overly high sticking it, but he's certainly working it. And that is the biggest fucking banjo you'll ever see in your life.
There's no banjo.
That's a shovel nose or whatever it's called. Oh, well, they call them fiddlers or something like that. Yep. And that rod, and he's just gone. He's going to live another day. Impressions of the rod, Ant?
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, nice.
Quite like it.
Quite like it. Catch you a bit later.
So we very much like putting rods through the paces when we're testing new equipment, and we're purposely high sticking them and purposely loading them up to see whether we can break them, because if we do break them, it means the common Joe Blow will break them, because we know how to fight a fish pretty reasonably well. So making sure that we're keeping that rod at the 45 degree and not lifting it up too high under tension, particularly when the fish runs. Anth, why do you love matching it with a Saragossa 10,000 and 50 pound braid?
50 pound, look, it's probably a little bit overkill for the work we do, but offshore reefs, when I do fish offshore, I just like that extra added protection. And South Channel, anything from 8 ounce to 16 ounce sinkers some days, you just want that extra pull if you can just put a bit more hurt on the fish, especially in tide.
Yep, cool.
In terms of Saragossas, I've come from pens. They weren't pen slammers, they were pen combats. I like the pens, but I just had too many niggly little corrosion issues with them and just got sick of pulling them apart and maintaining them. So I stepped up to the Saragossas, really.
Yeah, I'd say that the Saragossa has been an absolute staple. It's been around since 2013, and the 10,000 is just, again, so versatile. Using a thicker braid, and again, got some to show you. When we buy braid, we buy it in big spools, and this is a 3,000 metre spool of just the regular Daiwa J-braid 50 pound, which is quite a thick 8-strand 50 pound. We're also running the Siglon X5 50 pound, which is considerably thinner, and we haven't had any breakages with it. So just to give you an idea of line capacity for everyone out there, we're getting about 335 metres of 50 pound J-braid to a Saragossa 10, but with the Siglon X8 super thin stuff, you're almost upwards of 560 metres, and then particularly if you're buying bulk spool out of a tackle shop, that can get quite expensive. Now, Anth, we rig them a couple of different ways. We're using both a running sinker rig and a three-way swivel. Can you tell us a little bit about why we're doing that and what particular fishing situation that might lend itself to?
So running sinker rig, I think most people will have seen it floating around on Facebook these days. I run about a 2.5 to 3 metre shock leader down to a swivel, down to a swivel, and then an easy rig slider loop down to sinker, then metre and a half worth of leader down to a 7 to 9 circle normally. In terms of up down, I've fished both ways up down. I've fished dropper knots and I've fished swivel, 3-way swivel. I've had less break-offs on 3-way swivels. I've had dropper knots fail on me, especially after extended fights for a little period of time.
Yeah, so when we talk about up-downs, we're sort of, it's almost a little bit like a paternoster, but we're using a 3-way swivel. So again, got a little bit of an example of that. There's lots of different brands of them. and I don't know if you can see this that well. This is the Sesame ones, which is a rolling swivel, or what they call a reticulated swivel. And it's so tiny, but it's 93 kilos in capacity, which is in terms of its strength holding, which is unbelievable. The three-way swivel, Anth, when are we using that and why are we using that?
So I've found in offshore, depending on your bait, if it's not perfect on the way down, we seem to get a few twists in amongst it. That swivel just allows it to go down, get to the bottom and untangle itself a little bit. In current, I've found that I can actually get a bait to sit more natural in a tide, like in southern Port Phillip Bay, with the three-way swivel setup rather than a dropper knot.
Yep, sure. I really like the three-way style because particularly if you're running less current offshore, they can present bait and chunk baits pretty naturally. What do you recommend in terms of the length of the leader that you would put the hook on for a three-way swivel setup for, say, if we're doing offshore fishing?
I normally run somewhere between 6 and 8 inch length of leader.
Yep.
And then depending on the ground I'm fishing will depend on how far my sinker line is. Yep,
fantastic. And what about in a running sinker rig? How long is the leader from your swivel in a running sinker rig?
Generally 1 metre to 1.5, depending on what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Normally they start off at about 1.5 metres, but they end up back at 1 metre by the time you've had a few bust offs and banjos and cut offs. So,
yep, fantastic. All right, now talking about the good old setups. Now, there's a million of different rods and reels, and look, if you wanted to use a 6,000 reel or an 8,000 reel in tide or offshore, absolutely. A Saragossa 10 on that style, or a Daiwa Salter 6.5 or an 8,000 will give you lots of line capacity. So I think that by all means, if you want to, even 30-pound braid is probably pretty reasonable. But one of the things that we like using a bit stronger braid and a bit stronger reel is because of the battle with the shitfish. And that could also be, pretty sizable gillers, which tend to occur around your gummy grounds. So talk us through fighting gillers, Anth, and how are we dealing with those with our gear?
We're not having any dramas dealing with them. Obviously, they can be a bit tedious, especially if they come around and they've packed up and there's just one after another. But I don't see any dramas with the rods we're running. Like, I've put a lot of hurt through these rods this season, and I've been able to pull them up pretty quick. I'd like to really hook a bronzy and really put a rod to the test. Mm-hmm. In saying that, like, I had a tuner on this year that we literally got spooled on a 10,000 with 50 pounds. So The rod is working hard. Yeah,
and it can happen. And we've just had a question through, really good question. Why such a short leader on a three-way? And Anth, tell me if you agree or disagree with me. The reason why we use a really short leader is so that the bait can sort of flow out and present naturally in whatever current you're fishing offshore. It's also so it is less likely to entangle around your sinker dropper, which is hanging from the bottom of the three-way. So often the sinker dropper, we're using about 20-pound line, which is acting as a breakaway, maybe an 8-ounce sinker. So if we are fishing brutal reef, and that sinker does get caught in the bottom, that we can pull pretty hard, cup the spool of the reel with our hand, give it a yank, and that will break away and still get our rod and our braid and everything back. So I think that's the reason that I see. Would you agree with that, Ed?
Yeah, it just basically needs to be long enough so that the shark can literally come up to it, grab the bait, and not interfere with the main line and the swivel, really.
Yep. And in terms of dropper length on the three-way setup, what sort of length are you using there?
I normally run between 1 and 1.5 metre leader, depending on the ground I'm fishing. The more reef I'm fishing, the slightly longer the leader.
Yep. And another question that's just come through, this is again a very good question. So when we're fishing offshore, and we in slower tides, we're also using these three-way setups as well. We generally fish 2 runners, 2 3-ways. We drop it down, we let it hit the bottom, and then we give it a bit of a wind up because we sort of want it bouncing with the boat movement. It does depend on the conditions. What's your preference there?
Yeah, as long as it's on the bottom 80% of the time, 70, 80% of the time. If it does come up from swell or rough conditions, you can't avoid it. Running a little bit of slack tends to affect your hookup rates and detection anyway. So I'll normally have a balance act going.
Yep, fantastic. All right, so we've covered a little bit off rigs and the rods that we're using, we're testing out at the moment. Now, leader line, good old Jinkai Green, 80 pound. I think that's your weapon of choice as well. A lot of people use 60 pound. Why do you prefer 80? Because I know why I prefer 80, but Anthony, you prefer 80. Why?
Yeah, look, 60 to 80 is probably most people's preferred choices. 80 for me is just that slight added protection against reefs, the chance of a 7-gill or a school shark. Don't get me wrong, you'll catch them on 60 as long as they're hooked right, but longer fights with slightly bigger fish, you have a higher chance of abrasion on the line. So I'd rather run 80 and have that security.
And we haven't really noticed any difference in bite detection at all. I think that little bit extra abrasion resistance. I know that when we're fighting a schoolie, when we were last fishing with each other, we fought that thing for a long time and put a lot of hurt on it. Unfortunately, it did bust us off at the end of the day, but we did get to see it. We did get to see the size of it. We got to chase it for a while. We would have been nowhere on 60 pound for sure.
That's correct.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we're talking about rigs and we're talking about setups. And for Port Phillip Bay and offshore, I know what you're going to say, but just for the listeners and the watchers out there, a choice of hook.
My choice of hooks is 7 to 9.0 circle. I've been using inline circles more than I have offset circles. I'm finding that the inline circles are definitely giving a much better corner of the mouth. And in saying that, when I run out of offsets, straights, I go back to offset circles. So both work well, but I've just found that the inlines are a better hook up in the jaw.
Yeah, I agree. And again, talking about 1%ers, is particularly if you're fishing with current in Westernport or Port Phillip Bay, an offset, if you've got really good hook exposure on your bait, and even though it's so minimal, can also contribute to inducing spin. So that's why I like the chunk style baits or the fillet style baits on inlines. And there's a couple of different types. So if we talk Gamakatsu for a moment here, these bad boys here are the inline 8.0s, and they're the big bait circle SEs. So these are the same wired diameter as your Gamakatsu 7.0 octopus circle, which has been a gummy staple hook for many, many years. And a lot of other people like, Gwayne Blake, who wouldn't follow Gwayne Blake's recommendations, like the big bait circles, which are the non-SEs, and they are quite fat indeed. The reason why we like using the thinner gauge wire is because we don't tend to suffer hook straightening or breakages with Gamakatsu hooks. I know that we've never had one break in our fishing missions, Anth. But the big bait ones, if the fish are being a little bit more finicky, particularly when the water's colder and the gummies are mouthing the bait, you need considerably more hook penetration to set that hook as compared to a thinner gauge hook. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that goes with pretty much any hook. Like, I prefer a fine gauge. We're stepping off topic here a bit, but I prefer a finer gauge hook regardless of what fishing I'm doing, whether it's whiting, gummy. I'll even try to run a fine hook for tuna as well for your school stuff. Yep.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And hint, we are going to be talking tuna in some upcoming shows with some very special guests as well. All right, so we've talked gear, we've talked hooks, we've talked leader. I want to now, if I can kick over, because we've got a huge land-based following here in Just Your Average Fisho's land. Justin, welcome to the show, mate. We've just been talking rod setups and thinking about going on a mission to, going out for a gummy fish. Can you tell me how you approach, well, first of all, talk about your gummy stick for fishing land-based, and what are you prepping and what are you looking for to go out on a land-based gummy mission?
Yeah, mainly to start with is bait, obviously most important part, but a bait, obviously having fresh baits down the beach or even in a boat. You can always, like with my bait collection and stuff like that, I might be down at Hastings Pier every night time before I go, or late afternoon. Anywhere from the boat ramp to Stony Point Pier, down at even down around the rocks there. But I'll use plastics to target my bait or sabikis. But yeah, yakkers, trevally, pike if I can get pike is a good bait to go down the beach with. If I can't get my fresh bait, seafood baits, do a good trevally, or a yakker in a bulk sort of pack too. So for your chunk baits.
And when you're fishing, first of all, before we start really talking about baits and bait presentation for surf fishing, talk us through what rod, what size sinker, leader, hook, that sort of stuff. Yeah,
so I use a 12-foot Shimano Aero Wave off the beach. I think it's a 6 to 10 kilo rod, and it is a graphite rod. Casting distance, obviously on that rod's probably around about that 50 to 70 metres. So depending on where I'm fishing. I've got a Saragossa set up to all my beach rods, including my boat. They're not made as a surf casting rod or nothing like that, but for the reliability in the reel is why I use them. It doesn't really affect the casting distance, I'd say, that much to where I need to cast. And they've all got Power Pro Brave, which is a 50 pound. And then my setup is just an easy rig to a metre and a half running sinker, a couple of glow beads to an 8/0 gamma hook. The runners or your easy rigs that you use in your boat, which are initially your blue or your red easy rigs. Normally I'll use a white one off the beach, which is a real thin gauge easy rig, and I don't run a shock leader off the beach, more so for the casting distance. But if I do get a snag or do get that snagged up, that easy rig breaks off.
So just to be clear for those guys that want to follow some of your setups, you're running braid straight to a swivel.
Correct.
And then a metre and a half of lead to an 8/0 hook. What sort of knot are you tying direct to the swivel to make sure that you're not going to get any equipment wear on your braid, so to speak?
Yeah, I will use a uni knot, but it's probably got about 12-15 twists in that uni knot that comes down onto that swivel. So I've never pulled the braid off that swivel, but it does get wear on that braid. Obviously it's reefy, it's rocky and stuff like that. It's weedy, but yeah, you normally lose your sinker before you lose anything else. Okay,
fantastic. All right, now let's talk about bait presentation, and if you talk to us why you would do the bait presentation that you're doing. And sorry, I'm getting completely distracted because Shaun's just joined us and he's pulling faces at us. So can you talk us bait presentation versus current and stuff like that? That'd be great.
Yeah, bait presentation and also current land-based. You do find it hard to get a lot of current land-based. So you are looking for tidal areas land-based to get that tide flow. Also, too, it's a lot shallower. So your bait presentation, I'm still doing chunk baits, be it a trevally chunk to a yakker chunk to maybe a pike chunk and stuff like that. But I'm still just pinning that bait. So, yeah, just through the top of the trevally as a chunk bait or a yakker. And,
how long would your sinker dropper be there, mate?
Off the beach, I'm not running a dropper. So it's straight to the easy rig.
Okay, fantastic, cool. Thanks for that. And they're really accessible rods. So Shimano Aero Wave won't break the bank, nor does a Saragossa. It's a 12-foot rod. You can cast a reasonable sinker. Any tips that you could give to someone that's casting out so they don't damage a rod or anything in that manner?
Obviously the weight range of the rod, as you're not overcasting that sinker. So I'm using anywhere from probably a 4 ounce to a 6 ounce sinker casting was. 6 ounce is probably over the casting weight for that aero wave rod, but it has held up quite well. So if I was to say rod wise, I probably would have selected the composite rod in comparison just to the graphite rod, just for that extra strength, and it's got the castability as into cast a heavier sinker.
Okay, cool. And we're less worried about bait spinning in the shallows of surf fishing, but still obviously important to make sure you're rigging right down that symmetry axis so you're preventing any potential spinning.
Yeah. Because it is so shallow, you don't get a lot of that spinning effect in the shallow water. And initially you're either onto sand patches or like the gutter, which is in close, which is sand, or out that little bit further to weed patches and stuff like that. So if your bait was to sit, say, in the weed and get it snagged in the weed, you're virtually just lifting up your bait, and that 1.5 meters is sitting your bait right over the top of that weed.
Okay, so lots of questions coming through, so let's get some out of the way because we want to support these guys that are asking lots of questions. And by the way, I completely failed at the front of the show to say, at the start of the show, to say thanks to Complete Angler Ring. But obviously, you know that we're giving away a couple of gummy essential tackle packs with leader, swivels, line, hooks and bits and pieces that we will express post to you for the best question. So our producer will choose 2 best questions this evening at the end of the show after all the questions are asked through the Facebook live feed, and then we'll answer them all as best as we can for you, but the producer will pick 2 and we'll send those guys a prize like we did last week. So lots of questions. First of all, to you, Juzzy, favourite bait for fishing land-based?
Land-based, probably Trevally or pike.
Okay.
Yeah, you've probably got the 3, but my favourite's Trevally, probably followed by pike, and then your yakkers.
Okay, now Anthony, favourite bait for fishing Port Phillip Bay for gummies? You and I have fun talking about this one.
Yeah, you're going to have to say salmon, unfortunately.
No.
Yes, I'm going to have to.
Yep. Look, I'm a massive believer in activity breeds activity. And if you ever get to go fishing with Anth, you'll have a lot of shitfish activity because salmon love it. All right, so Anth, to you, fishing in tide, Port Phillip Bay versus offshore, we're using the same chunk baits or big fillet baits, and why do you prefer chunk to fillet?
Southern Port Phillip Bay, I generally run fillets if the fish are going to let me do it, in terms of what bait I've got available in size. Salmon, you can pretty much fillet anyway, but I do reasonably well on gurnard fillet as well too.
Yep.
Although a lot of people like them.
We do love the wrasse, absolutely. We do love trevally if we can get some fresh trevally. We've used some gurnard fillet before. Obviously, respect your bag limits on all of those fresh baits that you're catching for when you're presenting them for gummy fishing. We do use salmon. We've chucked down the old whiting fillet. Someone's just asked, do you use carp? No, we don't use freshwater species, and no, we don't use chicken at all. We use fresh bait fish that we can lop up. If we don't have any, we've always got frozen reserves, which is also calamari as well. Is eel an actual bait, and can you use it to target gummies? Yes, frozen and smoked eel can be used. I've never caught a gummy on it myself. It is indestructible on nights where you have lice, but the reason why you tend to have lice is because you will have you're either fishing mud barren ground or you'll have very little tide movement as well. What else have we got there? What do you look for off the beach, Justin? Are you looking for a gutter or what are you doing?
Yeah, well, a lot of my fishing is obviously down towards Summers, Balnarring, even down to Point Leo, but obviously going down during the day. And like I've mapped a lot of that stuff down there, but there's a big sand gutter on a high tide all the way down that beach. And casting to weed. So on a high tide, you've got a front gutter, which is a sand gutter at the front, and you're either casting to that or just over it to the weed.
Yep. Now, Westernport Fishers, we have not ignored you because obviously we've got Justin here land-based, but very, very special guest of the show is Shaun. Shaun from Think Big Fishing Charters, a very close friend of the producer and myself and the Complete Angler store. Shaun, it is wonderful for you to have and take some time out to join us this evening. Thank you so much. You're an absolute gummy icon of Westernport Bay. I love watching and seeing all of the recipes that you put up on your Facebook pages too with what you do with the food. Thank you for joining us this evening. How are you?
What an intro. I'm well, guys. How's yourselves? How's everyone out there in Facebook land?
I'm sure they're doing really, really well. Now, Shaun, you've been owner and operator of Think Big Fishing Charters for many, many years. Could you just give us a little précis into how long have you been fishing Westernport Bay and specifically managing or owning Think Big Fishing Charters?
Well, back when I started in Westernport, you used to have to get a horse and cart down the road to get there. Not quite, but look, I've been fishing Westernport, a long, long time now, since my late teens, early 20s. And I'm well past that now. But look, seriously, I've been chartering here for close to 12 years now, full-time, running Think Big Charters for over 10. And let's just say that I've learnt a lot in that time that I would never have learnt otherwise recreational fishing, because the pressure's on when you're in a charter sense. You've only got a short time. Often you've got limited weather or windows of opportunity to get the job done. As I said, the pressure's always there, probably more so from a charter perspective. The money's on the table, so you do want to get a result. So over the years, I've learnt what works, certainly doesn't. And, you know, there's almost like a recipe for success, you would say, but at the same time, you've got to keep an open mind. And probably one of the biggest pieces of good information I can give to any boater out there who's chasing gummy sharks is don't fall into the trap of flogging the same holes. You constantly need to be finding new areas because other areas are getting inundated with other anglers over time, so you need to be a step ahead. And in the charter game, I found that to be a real bonus to actually helping my work and getting the results that I have over the years.
Thanks for that, Shaun. And certainly that is an absolute backdrop to the Just Your Average Fisho's page in the reports that we do, is that we want to try and share technique to help people catch fish, but we're not about marks, because you can fish an area and it doesn't necessarily mean the fish are swimming there the next time or on the next same tide and moon pattern. So tell us a little bit, and a really good question that I have for you, and some of the viewers have sent these in pre the show, because there's just so many people that want to talk to you and ask you questions. If a client rings you and says, Shaun, I want you to take me and catch me that big gummy, what are the weather conditions or the tide conditions that you're looking for?
Well, look, time of year is probably the most crucial part of it, the whole 12 months. There's not a month of the year that you can't catch gummies in either Westernport or Port Phillip. It will become harder in the depth of winter and early spring. But this time of the year typically is a very, very good time of the year to catch big gummies. Tide-wise, for big gummies, look, there's a lot of, how could you say it, hot debate on what tide's the best. I can't always fish the most favoured tides that I want to, and over the years I've come up with some real surprises on tides that I probably didn't rate, and these days I do. Again, it comes back to being on the water so many times. You just learn little things that you keep in the memory bank, particularly when you've had success, but also when you've missed. I think you learn more when you miss than when you actually catch. Now, gummy shark tides, look, a lot of people like run-up tides. I myself do too. The prevailing winds down here are southerly or southeasterlies for the majority of the time. But we do see a swing in the northwesterly winds this time of the year. We've seen a lot of them in the last few weeks. And they will prevail from now right through until the start of spring. The thing with the northwesterly winds is they give a good deal of coverage and safety in Westernport because there's a lot of land mass. So there is still scope to be able to fish quite easily in some of these northwesterly winds. Run-out tides are well worth considering for gummy shark. I think that you'll find when you speak to most people who target gummy sharks and catch a lot of them, they'll probably say that, will agree with me, I'd say that the majority of the best fishing comes from mid to low tide, the last of the tide, I would say. In my experience, we've caught good gummies on the start of the tide, but they're typically smaller fish. And it's when that water gets down a bit that the better fish seem to be more active. I think it's a lot of that's got to do with what's happening with the food that the gummy shark are actively chasing in the likes of crabs, assorted fish and the like. But they definitely get on the hunt towards that low end of the tide. And that's also the time when the crabs are out feeding too. So it sort of goes hand in hand. When one thing's moving about, there's always usually something about chasing it. That's just the law of the world in the oceans. So, yeah, usually the run out or the last of the tide, the back end of the tide seems to be the most prolific for better sized gummies. And you'll also notice that the water will often colour up a little bit towards the arse end of that tide because of the extra sand in the system. And that coloured water can really see some good results as opposed to the cleaner water that you'd be fishing on the flooding tides.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. That's so much information there. We've just been talking about boat rigs before with Anthony and myself for fishing offshore at Port Phillip Bay. You're a charterman, you do countless hours on the water and you have people of all different experience levels using your equipment. What's your go-to rod and reel and braid or mono and leader and hook for fishing for gummies?
Okay. I've had the original T-curve series of rods on the boat for 7 or 8 years now. I donated one a few months ago or over a year ago now. It went, see you later. That was gone into the water. These are the old original 10 to 15 kilo Shimano T-curves, the old blue water models. They're quite soft up the top. They're actually originally touted as a popper style rod or a casting rod. I don't think you'd last more than about 3 casts casting a lure for the topwater tuna these days. They're very, very taxing on the angler. But what they are very, very good for is gummy fishing. If you can find the old ones, they occasionally pop up on Marketplace, Facebook and the like. They're well worth looking at. They're a good, strong, honest rod that will go the distance. I've never had one break. The extra length on most of the other rods that have followed on from that style of rod is a better choice, I believe, to sit in the rod holders well clear of the boat, but also assists and aids in casting. And that soft tip really does absorb the initial crazy bang smack type inquiry that a gummy shark's famous for. The newer T-curves that Shimano have brought out are certainly up to the task. They're a little bit stiffer in the tip and they've got the newer K guides on them. They don't cast as far as the original T-curves do, but look, that's not going to change any amount of fish coming on your, into your boat. Mm-hmm. I couple that with a twin power Shimano 10,000 reel. I've had those for the same time I've had the rods. They'd have to be 7 or 8 years old now. Again, they're a obsolete reel these days, unfortunately, but the closest thing to them would probably be either the current model twin powers, or if you wanted to go overboard, you'd probably look at, say, some of the Stellas. Now, that's probably a little bit high end for gummy shark fishing, but it can also double up as a good kingfish reel or school tuna reel as well. Yep. Sort of a multifaceted type approach. Line, I've always run braided line for the sharks in Westernport. I run 30-pound braid, and not brand conscious at all. I did use the Shimano Twin Power. Twin Power is it called? The yellow stuff. I think it's called Twin Power.
Power Pro.
Power Pro, that's the one I always get. Yeah, Twin Power, Power Pro. Yeah, Power Pro. I used that for years and never had any failings or letdowns with it. It loses its colour a bit in the tidal water. The tide seems to sort of strip the colouring off it a bit over time, but certainly not a weak line or anything. It's very reliable. It's not expensive either. These days I'm using the, I think it's Momoy braid that I've got on at the moment, which I picked up through Complete Angler Ringwood. It's very, very smooth running. It's high vis orange, so it's easy to see. Off that braid, I run a 40-pound mono leader around about 3 metres long. I used to run it a bit longer, but about 3 metres long. I probably should attach it with an FG knot, but most of the time I get away with a bimini twist in the braid and then attach the mono via a duck knot leader or a duck knot nose leader knot. That's a mouthful. And I run that leader of 40-pound about 3 metres long, and then I have the rig on the end of it, which I just happen to have here. I don't know for the viewers there at home if they can see that. This 40-pound leader comes down to a bead, a little running thing known as a duck's nuts. You can use the more common easy rig style clip if you like, but you'll see that this is really, really slimline, small, very unobtrusive. It's very slippery, so it runs really, really well up the line when you get a strike. And it's also good if you're fishing for snapper up around the tidal reaches at the top end there, say anywhere from, say, Eagle Rock through to Lang Lang. We know that the weed flow through those areas can be a bit hazardous some nights when you're fishing, and this here will help alleviate that weed build up on your rod tips a lot better than the easy rigs because it's a smaller area. I put a glow bead on the top and a glow bead underneath. The glow bead at the top just stops anglers winding the duck's nuts up into the guide in the closing stages of the fight. The bottom one there stops that duck's nut getting fouled up on the knot of the swivel. It's a standard rolling swivel, about a 10-kilo model. And then I have an 80-pound leader, which is not overly long. It's probably about 1.4, 1.2. It doesn't have to be any longer than that. Any longer and it gets a bit hard, particularly if you're solo and you've got a big fish and you're trying to net it both sides. This is always finished with a Gamakatsu 8.0 circle hook. They're the hook of choice for myself. I've used the Gamakatsu 8.0 octopus pattern circle for more years than I can remember now. I've tried a few other circles, but I just keep coming back to these. They are expensive these days in comparison to what they were once upon a time, but like everything else, fishing is not a cheap exercise anymore. I also run a stiff style Lumo bead tube that is more commonly used with game fishing. The reason I use this is simply to add a bit of glow down near the bait, which I don't think is a bad thing. They're the ones. I don't think you'd have a problem not using the glow tip, but it certainly helps at night when you're winding in baits. You can see the baits coming up through the water. It just assists the angle when you're swinging baits in. But it also gives you a slight bit of abrasion resistance down the bottom end. Look, where we fish and the nature of our fishing, we're fishing for sharks. We often do see other sharks turn up, such as seven gills or wobbegongs, and occasionally a school shark, even bronze whalers in season in the height of summer. And this tube, over time, it's really proven itself. The thing is with wire down here in Melbourne waters, it just seems to really make things difficult in terms of hookups. People have tried wire and the like. They just don't seem to get the hookups that we guys do get with the mono. And yes, we do lose a fair amount of our hookups with the bigger tooth brigade. But again, we're sort of not fishing solely for those bigger fish. We're sort of having a bet each way where, occasionally we come up trumps and we do land a bronzy that's 20 or 30 or 40 kilo if we're lucky, but more often than not, it's the gummy shark that we're targeting.
Okay, thanks, Fruits. A couple of quick fire questions from me, Fruits, for Westernport fishing. And obviously Westernport is very, very tidal, so it can be quite taxing to learn for new anglers that might be first to using a boat or going for a gummy shark in Westernport. Just before, though, there's a number of other questions. Your favoured bait and chunk or fillet style?
Big fan of chunk baits. I used to use fillets a long time ago. The trouble with the fillet baits is because of the openness and the softness of the meat just on the skin, they do tend to be prone to be hit by smaller fish and torn up and destroyed a lot quicker than a chunk bait. A chunk bait can withstand a fair bit of abuse before it needs to be changed unless the sea lice are on fire. But even then, you can get a longer soak time out of a chunk bait than you will a fillet bait, I believe. For those people who are using twin hook rigs for gummy sharks, I suggest you go back down to a single circle hook. The system works, you just got to let the fish hook itself. A lot of people are a little bit excited and they want to hit the fish too quickly. The circle hook is born out of the commercial industry on a set and forget basis, and if those guys can go out and set a couple of thousand hooks and fill them up with fish of their own accord that are hooking themselves, it goes to show that the system does work. You just got to have a bit of patience, let the fish run and bounce a bit on the rod. The action rod will soon tell you when that fish is hooked.
Cool.
But, bait-wise, look, the list is long and strong. The main criteria is it must be fresh. I cannot say that more strongly, to the point where I've actually cancelled charters, come home, back to Stony Point, said, we're not going out, guys, because I haven't got fresh bait. Now, I've done that 3 times in 10 years. I need to catch fresh bait. So what do? I might go to BP Jetty, I might go to Tankerton, I might go to the Middle Spit, I might go over to Ventnor. It doesn't matter. I want fresh bait, whether it's wrasse, yakkers, trevally, salmon, snook, eel, I don't care. Now, you're not going to catch too many live eels in Westernport, but you can catch them in creeks and rivers around the place, particularly after a bit of rain. But I cannot stress using fresh bait more. Simple fact is that the fish that we're fishing for, they don't eat frozen offerings ever. So I firmly believe that you're lowering your chances. And I know that we all haven't got the availability of time. A lot of the time these days prior to a fishing trip to source fresh bait. Look, at the very least, if you know a reputable fish shop, somewhere like the Big Fish Shop in Carrum Downs, they're probably my go-to if I couldn't or can't find fresh bait. Back in the old days, I used to go there and buy a bit of bait off them. So good stuff. To the point where
Appreciate that, Shaun. Now, we've got a load of questions coming through, so I'm actually going to get our producer, Ben, just to ask a couple, because otherwise he's actually going to send me through a few. Okay, I was going to say, come on, Ben, get involved in voiceover. Shaun,
you ask him, because by the time I go to the chat and then come back, it's too hard.
No, you're okay, Shaun. No, you're doing really well. And again, thanks for putting up with us and coming on board for everyone. I know your time is valuable. Shaun, your preferred hook, is it inline or just with the offset curve?
Straight offset curve. The 8.0, I've never bothered buying the high-end inlines. I've never used them.
Yep. Cool.
Yep.
No worries. Now, Shaun, do you sit through a whole tide or move if not catching fish? How long until the first inquiry anchoring usually? Now, this goes back to some of the points that you said around tide and fishing the bottom end of the tide and tide change. So do you sit through a whole tide? What do you do?
Okay. Look, in the perfect scenario, let's say we've got a flood tide coming up in an hour or 2 hours and we've got time to get our bait in the last of the run out. A lot of people, and I see this all the time, they'll get their bait on that last bit of the run out and then screw their throttle to the dashboard to get round to where they want to fish for the very first kick of the start of the flood tide. Now, that's okay. They may get a fish, but 9 times out of 10, that fish will just be nothing special in size. It's an hour and a half into that tide onwards to the top where you're going to get better fishing. Mm-hmm. It's when that tide flow increases in strength and gets a bit of clip on it that the gummies seem to start feeding at a better height or, a far better rate. Earlier in the tide, it seems there's a lot of rubbish, Port Jackson, banjos, eagle rays, small gummy, then it'll go quiet. And that's when the time starts ticking towards the bigger side of things, from then to the top of the tide on a running tide. Yep.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. We'll keep getting Ben to put through questions. I'm going to kick over now to Justin just for a moment so you can take a sip of a drink, because you've given us so much, Shaun. Justin, just talking about land-based there again, mate. What's a couple of essential tips to approach land-based? So if you said, what are 3 things that are really essential for someone to consider catching a gummy land-based and making sure they're appropriately ready to do so?
Yeah, well, your main one's your tide. So tide, wind and weather, they're probably your 3. So making sure you've got that tide. Beach-wise, depending on where you're fishing, if I'm fishing Summers, Balnarring, Point Leo, in between probably Balnarring and Summers, it's a running tide. Anywhere from Merricks down to Point Leo, it's a run-out tide on them phases of the moon. But the tide's probably the biggest one out of the whole lot. You can catch gummies off the beach in pretty crap conditions. Down that way, southwesterly is probably a no-go to fish, as in you get the weed and stuff up on the beach. It's very hard to cast and get your bait out there, but you can still fish it and catch good fish. If you do get a northerly, it's probably perfect. If you have a northerly for a day or a day and a half before you fish down that way, it normally clears up all the weed off that beach, and it's quite pleasant to fish.
All right, all right, I'll just swing over back to Shaun. We've got these questions rolling through. Shaun, do you fish different areas and depths in winter versus summer?
Look, to be honest, 100%, 99% of my gummy shark fishing in Westernport, probably 95% of it, would be 12 metres or less. Okay? I fish deep water in the channel, in the faster water that's anywhere from 17 to 25 metres a couple of times a year at best. There might even be a season or two where I don't. I'll say this about gummy shark fishing. Yes, they can be caught during the day, but night time's the right time. And I say that strongly. If you look at the commercial fleet that supply flake to the industry, they don't fish during the day. They leave in the afternoon and they fish all night, and they rest up during the day and bait up hooks and clean the boat up and then get ready for the next afternoon set. And that's the way it rolls, because these fish are more active at night because their quarry is more active at night, and they can sneak up on crayfish at night while they're under a cave and getting around at dark thinking they've got the moz and everyone, and that's when they'll sneak up and feed. So they're a nighttime feeder. You can see that in their eyes. So nighttime's the right time for me, and that's why I have no issue fishing shallower water, anywhere from 8 to 12 metres on average. It's not to say that the deep water doesn't produce, because I know at the same time there's guys getting great results in the deeper water. It's a lot harder work. You're using great big leads, and it's not real fun when you're pulling in, Volkswagen-sized skates and the like on typical gummy gear, particularly for the average guy who may not have caught a lot of big fish. It destroys them. It's a lot easier to catch those same rubbishy fish in shallow water and get rid of them quickly.
And I suppose in really big tides in Westernport, fishing shallower water allows you to fish a longer period of tide. I know you're talking about fishing, but for someone that wants to sit there,
you can use a 6-ounce lead for the whole run, and that doesn't matter whether you fish in the whole anywhere from Sandy Point to Flinders, along inside the middle bank there, or anywhere from the bottom end of the middle spit right through to, say, the Cut, anywhere along there just out from the spit itself in 10, 12 metres. Terrific areas to fish. And it's easy fishing because you haven't got that huge flow because you're in a reduced depth. Okay.
And have you ever used crabs for bait, Shaun?
Personally, no. Personally, myself, I haven't. I know a handful of guys have. They get the lacquer bands out and strap them to hooks and the like. Look, there's no doubt they're going to work. You'll probably find that all you will catch will be either Port Jacksons or Gummy Sharks. They're a very popular bait in England, to the point where some charter skippers over there have got tiered fish bin setups with running water going through them, with hundreds and hundreds of crabs that they obtain from the local beaches, and they stockpile so that they've got crab on stock for bait. So, yeah, crab is, it's very rare that you open up a gummy shark and it hasn't got crabs inside them. So most definitely a good bait. It's just something that typical of Victorian fishermen, they're pretty lazy. Hasn't caught on yet. And until someone goes out and shows you a video of how to catch them or these hot baits, I don't think crabs are going to be used too much.
All right, so I'll just swing over to Anthony. You've been pretty quiet there, mate. When we're fishing together and we're fishing night together, what's one of your recommendations to tackle lice? And we haven't really had a lot of lice in some of the fishing that we've been doing, but how would you tackle lice? If we're fishing Port Phillip Bay and we've got a lice night, what do we do?
Fresh bait and big bait. It's the only thing that I've ever done that's worked. Anything frozen just gets attacked. Even a fresh bait's going to get attacked by lice, but at least a fresh bait's a lot longer lasting against lice.
Yep. Justin, same for you, mate. Lice off the beach, probably pretty common issue on certain nights.
I don't get a lot of lice at all off the beach.
Oh, okay. I'm wrong.
So, yeah. if you're out of that sand and you're actually up on weed and you've got tide flow, you actually don't get a lot of lice. It's only when them tides tend to slow down is when you get that lice. So yeah, and yeah, I don't tend to get a lot over them weed patches when I'm casting them weed patches. So yeah, still chunk baits and regularly checking the baits. And the main one too, like if you. When you're doing bait checks and you've been hit by lice by one, obviously changing both baits, assuming you've both been cleaned up by lice, and obviously reload. So yeah.
Yeah, and Shaun, same for you. Do you find lice, or do you find the tide keeps it out?
They find me. It's usually on the lead up to new moon. It's usually, look, they say that they're not around on the full moon. I beg to differ. Some nights they are, but it's typically the night of the full moon and definitely after it. The night after it, 2 nights after it, as we're starting to head into the quarter and get up to the next new, those lice go into overdrive. Not many people understand lice, and not many people know that they spend about 24 days of the calendar month under the sand. So they're bloody hungry when they come out on those darker moons, and that's why they devour our bait so quick. There is millions of them in the water when they're out there. They are literally like dust in the air. And they'll devour baits really, really quick, to the point where I've been known to set my alarm on my clock every 4 minutes. And when you can get a 4 minute plus soak time, that's good. Anything 4 minutes or under, she's looking tough, because you just go through so much bait. But that's not to say you can't catch a gummy shark when those lice are there. I've had customers sort of egg me on, we've never had any success while we're catching lice and can't catch a gummy. We've had rods go off with good fish. I think they're part of the system. I think they do the anglers' heads in more than anything. And, it hurts when you've only got 4 or 5 baits and you're feeding them to lice. There's not a great deal you can do. You can move somewhere else, but they're just going to find you because they're on the prowl on those nights. So, look, if you can, from a recreational point of view, try to avoid those couple of nights just after the full moon and the night or two during the new prior to the new. Having said that, they're very prime tides. Some nights you'll get out there and the lice are sort of okay. They're sort of behaving themselves. So you just got to take it each night as it comes.
Yep, okay. And just for a question for each of the panel, Anthony, do you keep a fishing diary, mate?
Yeah, my mobile phone of pictures.
I keep an Excel sheet, but I'm always finding I'm going through the photo times to backtrack to tides myself. Justin, you keep a diary, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I do. Tides, wind, weather, fish caught on tides, and the whole lot. What was in their stomach to a degree. So some stupid stuff.
Fruits, I imagine, being in the charter business, you'd have a lot of data up in your noggin.
Yeah,
you're not on a computer.
I used to keep a pretty sharp diary, to be honest, and document a lot. I don't these days that much because a lot of it's up in the head, and I've got a fair idea of what we can expect a lot of the time. So I don't diarise as much because I've done it for so many years now that I've just got a fair understanding of what I can expect, and I just don't bother it. And as Anthony said earlier, his phone, that gives you a fair indication of what's going on, in terms of, your catches with your photos and the like, or your postings. But I don't diarise as much as I used to. But I suggest people who are starting out, who are trying to feel the waters and get an idea of what's going on, diarise things. But you don't have to add every single weather element. Just a couple of key factors like the time you fished, maybe the weather on the night, and the bait you used, and the times that you fished. The date will tell you the tide because of the moon phase, so you don't have to write in the actual tide time. Mm-hmm. If you look at the moon phase on a tide chart, that'll give you those tides anyway, because they'll be the same each tide chart.
Okay. Now, Justin, question for you. Have you ever done drone fishing? Do you feel you need to do a drone bait release when you're land-based fishing?
No. I haven't. I've got a mate who's got a drone, and obviously we thought about droning baits out, but I haven't done it. The fish come up close on them tides, on that incoming tide. They're pushing up shallow. So if you're droning out, you're probably droning baits over the fish or out past the fish.
Yep, fantastic. All right, keep your questions coming in. Shaun, I'd love to have the wealth of information that you have. I suppose if you were a new person to gummy fishing, sat down and said to you, Shaun, tell me a few things that are absolutely critical to help, other than fresh baits. We're all very clear on that one. So other than fresh bait, what is a few things that's critical to helping someone catch a gummy that wants to go out and catch a gummy? What would you say?
Try and position yourself not too far away from some reef, if possible. Reef will show up on your sounder in most cases as a bit of hard rock and the like, and you'll see the difference in the bottom. It's the sounder talks a chat in its own, but if you can get some areas where you know that there's some reef, you'll find that your catch rate will go up, because where the reef is where the crabs and the other things they like to eat hang out, particularly things like wrasse and parrotfish. A lot of people don't understand or know that wrasse sleep in the reefs at night. And a little tip, if you're going to chase gummy sharks and you want wrasse for bait, make sure you're catching your wrasse before about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, because you'll find after that time, from this time of the year onwards, they'll be very hard to catch because they're bedding down for the night in the reefs. So I think if you can find yourself a bit of reef, that's good. Good strong flow. You don't want a flow that starts off and then just peters out an hour into the tide. You want a nice continual flow. Areas off Observation Point back through to Silverleaf produce a lot of gummies, particularly around Christmas time or just after. And that, if you think about it, it works in with why we catch so many snapper there. It's not clean mud there. There's reefy ground all through there, little clusters of coral and scallops and the like, perfect places for gummy sharks. And it's no coincidence that quite a few gummy sharks get caught through there during the snapper season, as well as along the edges of Elizabeth Island and the like. Again, it's good reefy ground where those fish are going to hold. You can often feel the type of ground you're on with the sinkers that you're using, particularly with the braided line. You'll get a very solid reverb back up the rod tip when you're on that harder packed ground. And just think about where you're fishing during the season to apply it to gummy shark. Places where you've caught pinkies and even whiting. They're not clean. They're not feeding over clean, bright, brilliant sand. There'll be some weed there. There'll be some reef close by. Places where you've picked up trevally and yakkers. Great places to think about targeting a gummy at night with some of those fresh baits we mentioned earlier. The gummy sharks are sort of a critter that will get around the port. They don't just sort of localise in one area. So you can find yourself in some reef with a bit of tidal flow. There's a good chance at night time with fresh bait that a gummy will literally find you. That's the way I put it. Now, you asked earlier about moving. I don't move a great deal. Look, there's been times where I've moved once or twice during a charter, but for the most part, I catch bait and I go to an area and I prop. I sort of put all the cards on the table and give it a good go there. And look, occasionally, I fail too and miss out. That's just the part of the role that is fishing. But look, for the most part, I think if you start moving around too much during the middle of the tide, you're sort of not really concentrating on where you should be. I think Anthony will almost agree with this down in the South Channel. It's pointless moving. If you're going to catch them in an area, you'll give it a good go there, and usually they'll turn up more often than not if everything's going to plan. Because they're not a hard fish to catch or shark to catch. It's just, I think confidence is a big thing of it. I sometimes sit in a spot 2 or 3 hours before we get a bite, but I know in past previous trips that we've got them there, so I'll sit it out. Yep.
I couldn't agree more, Shaun. I'm one that if I'm going to go hunt a particular area, particularly when Anth and I fish together, we go, we drop and we stay and we get what we get, and we don't get upset. That's a saying that I use to my 6 and my 8-year-old all the time, and it's something that Anth and I say to each other a few times in a few recent trips as well. Anth, with what Shaun's saying there, you'd agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. With the South Channel, you've got a lot of tide flow. Baits have oils and that going out of them. The scent's going to go with the tide. The only time that I would move in the South Channel is if I pulled anchor, and I've only done that twice.
Yep, fantastic. And I think there was a question there about, look, I can only pull up gillers. Should I move? If you're getting gillers, it's a good sign you're going to get a gummy. Sometimes the gillers can scare off the gummies. What are your thoughts, Shaun?
Bloody gillers. Look, they...
Gary.
Someone's farming them, I swear. Someone's farming them and releasing the bastards.
We never saw them 30 years ago.
Oh.
We never saw them. I first started reading about them in southeast fishing. They're catching them at Port Albert and that. And then, you know, you'd hear of the odd one. And then Paul Worsling back in the day, when he first started his shops, he'd be like, if you want to go and catch one of these mighty 7 gillers, and everyone thought it was great. And after about 2 fish, you're like, these are shit. So we just don't bother with them these days. They find us like the gummies and everything else. Look, seriously, I had a trip pre-COVID rules back in March. I think we got 5 for the night, and I came home with less hair than I've ever had. They're a bugger of a thing. If they're in numbers like that, you've really got to move. It's just not easy when you're getting a lot of play by the gillers. If they, look, 1 or 2's all right, 0's even better. What I will say about gillers is they do eat gummy sharks, and I think if you've got a number of them in the area, poor old gummy shark's probably hiding and, you know, hanging around with the wrasse, you know, trying to keep out of the way.
Yep. Okay. Now, here's a technical one to the panel, and so I'll put it to the panel. I know it's a bit hard, this electronically, so we don't want people cutting over each other, but I'll go to you first, Shaun. Electrolysis with tackle, do you have that problem? And what about smooth hounds, so the good old school shark? We do see those from time to time. They're pretty, hang on, Ben's shaking his head at me. I've got this wrong. Ben, come in and interject, mate. Come on, be a part of the show.
Smooth hound, as far as I know, is what the English call our gummy sharks.
There you go. Okay. So electrolysis, Shaun.
Electrolysis. No, the last bout of electrolysis I had was in my 474 Stacer when it had 44 holes in its underhull. But look, little things like these tubes that I mentioned earlier will certainly help that. I don't sort of bother too much about covering up the likes of swivels or anything like that. But look, it comes back to what I was saying before. You could put out a wire rig against your gummy rigs, and look, I'm not saying you won't catch gummy. Someone hearing this will probably prove me wrong on the next time they go out. But what I'm getting at is they don't seem to like the wire, our southern sharks, particularly when they're inshore. It's like they're on edge or something. I don't know, but I think if you were to put a wire bait out in amongst your gummy rigs, you definitely probably got a chance, especially if it's a bigger bait, you probably got a chance at a bigger shark. I don't think gillers are too bothered by the wire. I think they're just driven by their nose when they're hungry. But if you look at the big guys who fish for sharks all the time, wire's the first thing that comes out. You know, mono's just not talked about. So I myself, I don't bother too much or get too hung up on the likes of electrolysis and like the hook hanging out of the bait or something. I just pin my baits lightly, just in the middle of the chunk. So yeah, that pretty much covers me on that.
All right. So Justin, question for you: do you follow the solar charts when fishing for gummies? So solar charts. So I suppose moon and bits and pieces like that.
All the tides and your full moon, your new moon. Is all obviously to do with the tide. So I don't actually look at the moon phases, but I know the moon phases correspond to the tides. Yep. If that makes sense. So more what I'm looking for is the flow of the tide. So it doesn't matter if it's a new moon phase or full moon phase, land-based, or I'd say even in a boat. But it's that flow of the tide. So my ideal tide's anywhere from probably a good flowing tide, which is probably 1.8 to 2.2 changing tide. So the flow. So
Fantastic. All right, so we're kicking on in the show a bit, and we've got to keep moving and also wrap this up a bit. So if you get your final questions in, we'll switch to a bit of question time now. Quick fire question time, short answers, guys, and a couple of interesting ones are, contour lines and reef drop-offs or big drop-offs for gummy sharks in Port Phillip Bay. Yes, Anthony and I fish a lot of like channels, so to speak, but we also like contour line changes as well. And we also, to echo Fruits' sentiments exactly, we try not to fish same marks too consistently. We do fish areas reasonably consistently to understand what are the movements of the fish are in those areas. Ant, if you're looking for ground in Port Phillip Bay or a new area, what are you looking for?
Definitely drop-offs. Anything 1 to 2 meters drop-off would be ideal. There are some good areas in South Channel and Simmons and that drop off 3-4 meters. Depending on what the tide's doing, I will pick a bit deeper drop-off if it's a slower tide, but generally I'll fish a 1 to 2 metre drop-off.
Yep. And Justin, preferred tide for land-based, mate?
Incoming tide's the main one. The longer period of tide you've got, obviously after last lot, the more obviously, or the longer period you've got to fish. So, a high tide late at night, 12, 1 in the morning. Obviously, it's a long night fishing, but yeah, I'll fish right from the bottom of the tide and normally fish just after the high.
Okay, and Shaun, quick fire question for you. Gummies affected by the barometer, in your opinion?
It's a hard one. That I don't reckon they are as much as the likes of snapper. I've had good gummies in some really stormy weather over the time. What Anthony was saying earlier about finding new marks in South Channel with drops and that's spot on. If you can find a drop of 3 or 4 metres, more often than not, there's a bit of rubble and hardness in it. It's not just soft sand, something's holding it there. And more importantly, there's a good current flow off that step back into the drop. So that's a really good bit of information for anyone in both, either Westernport or Port Phillip Bay. And one other thing I wanted to mention is the amount of fish that I've caught on yakkers over the years. People sort of get hung up with the likes of the exotic, or the glamorous baits, I'll call it, slimy mackerel, trevally, salmon. You can't always get them en masse, but you can always get a yakka in Westernport, particularly around the pier structures and the like. I don't know how many charters they've saved over the years. I've gone out with just a few yakkers at a time, but don't discredit the fresh yakka because it's probably caught more gummy shark per se than any other bait, simply because I've used them more often than all the other baits put together.
Okay, thanks, Shaun. There was a question, liveys for gummies. That's a definite no from me, unless I wanted to try a live crab, which I haven't done. You guys, liveys, Shaun?
No, I've never done it. Never bothered with it. To be honest, I think the biggest problem we'd have with live is they'd probably end up getting snagged, find a bit of cover, and try and keep a low profile. So I've just never bothered with them.
Okay. Justin or Anth, any sort of opinions or any sort of tips that you guys could add to maybe to Justin for land-based and Anth for Port Phillip Bay, critical tips? I think I agree completely with your point before, Anth. We spend a lot of time sounding new ground to stay away from boats. It's not because we don't like other boats. It's just that we're trying to fish new areas and fish less pressured areas. And I think that we should all do that, and there's nothing worse than I put up a post earlier on the Just Ravage Fishers page, don't park near me, go find your own area, So many people are hung up on this whole, you must fish this mark and you must fish it every time business. That's almost guaranteed to make you be less successful in your catching of fish, in my opinion. Anth?
Yeah, for sure. I think going back to liveys, best bait's dead bait. And one of the other baits that I've tried recently and had quite good success on as well is whiting. Holds very well in tide because of the shape of it. whether you cut it in half, run the tail, it's streamlined, doesn't spin, and perfect bait, easy to get hold of in Port Phillip Bay.
Ben
And
Shannon thinks you're.
I have to ask you something here. I've tried, and it seems like the gillers can smell them from 30 kilometres away and track them down.
Yeah, what was the moon phase that night, Ben?
I think I was about 5 Ks away from you, and you were getting nailed as well.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
No, that's very good. Okay, now, Ben, you've got a little bit of a video that we can put in showing a gummy take that Anth had on one of these lovely 7'2" new Teres rods. Shaun, I love the blue waters too, but I can tell you these new 72M Teres blacks are the shiznit, mate, for any sort of fishing. They are fantastic.
Don't you have to own a bar crusher to have Tereses?
Don't you be silly. No, they're cheaper than the blue waters.
It just seems like you have a bar crusher, you've got to have 6 white Tereses in a line.
No, these aren't white, mate. They're black. We're the new breed.
Oh!
We're
black.
Non-racial profiling.
Once you try black, you can't go back.
That's right. Cue the video, Ben. All right, so quite a good gummy take there. Now the question, Shaun, now you would need to be teaching more people in gummy fishing this than any one of us put together. How do you know when to strike?
Well, it's the word strike doesn't come into it. It's more just grab the rod and hang on. I say often to the people, let the bite develop. You'll initially see a bit of a bobble and a wobble on the rod tip. That's just the nature of the shark shaking its head side to side. I think they actually take the bait into their mouth, start trying to get it down, and all of a sudden come across that hook, and it's a bit foreign because they're wondering why the bait probably isn't free and easy to grab, and it's sort of being held by this leader, and that's why we see that continually growing bend and bang on the rod. Eventually, I think by that stage, the hook is just starting to touch the inside of their mouths, and that hook finds its mark, and that's when we see that rod buckle over and off they go. To be honest, there's no rush with gummy shark fishing. I say to people, you'll boat more fish if you're cool, calm and collected and just sit on your hands, wait till that rod tip's really over and yielding. You can't go wrong. It's just a matter of picking up the rod, keeping the line tight. You really don't have to strike because the fish has done that for you with the tension on the drag. While we're on drags, fish a firm drag, not something that's really loose like you may get away with in Port Phillip Bay on the snapper in spring, but and you want a firm drag that puts a good working curve, something around 2 to 3 kilo, really firm drag, because a good firm drag will help assist the hookup, particularly the circle hooks, and the system will just more than likely hook the fish for you. Yep,
I couldn't agree more, Shaun. I think that particularly when the fish can be really, really finicky and mouthing the baits, letting them go longer, it doesn't hurt. Like I haven't been spooled by a gummy ever, even in the biggest one. And look, my biggest one's probably 24, 26 kilos. So it's not a behemoth, which other people have caught.
That's still a very big fish. I think you'd be flat out, I mean, you hear stories of 200 and 300 yards. It's a lot of line.
Mm.
I think on average, a really good run's probably somewhere between 60 to 100 metres. It's just that, the real scream and you're in the moment, it sounds like it's going forever. It's not as long as you think, but that's not detracting from them because they're a wonderful fish to catch or shark to catch.
Yep. Now, I certainly have a challenge for you, Fruits, and I'm sort of going to bring the panel to a close in a minute. For those of you who follow Shaun on Facebook, and I do because you learn so much from the little tidbits of information that he gives, one of the amazing things that he offers to all of his Facebook followers is the wonderful recipes and cooking from his partner, Claire. She's an absolutely amazing cook, and the plates look very delicious. I challenge Fruits that the next 7 giller that you get, you take it home and and give it to Claire to turn into a masterpiece. Because if anyone's going to do it, it's her. And when you've got to report back and be honest. You can't talk
Be honest. Okay, be honest. Would you buy a porterhouse steak, piss on it, and then eat it? Neither would I. Right, because 7 gills urine through their flesh. No, they can stay in the water. We'll leave them. I'd rather eat a handful of salmon, a kelp sandwich.
Yeah. No, mate, the challenge is there. It's a genuine challenge.
7 gil.
Yeah, 7 gil. Because, you know, lots of people think they're delicious. If Claire can do it, anyone can do it, all right? So, look, there's a myriad of questions. We haven't been able to get to them all. Please keep pegging them through. I'll scroll through the comments after the show and throughout tomorrow to answer as much as we can. Shaun, I just want to thank you very much, because for a charter person to give up their time and a lot of information, it's very, very kind of you, because your living is out of taking people fishing. If I can just say so myself, when I started gummy fishing many, many, many moons ago, going out with chartermen like yourself was the way how I started to develop my knowledge. So certainly someone that wants to learn fishing in a boat, spending a few $100s in doing one trip, or even $500 in doing a few trips, you just cannot not do that. You must do that if you're new to fishing, fishing in boat or whatever. Justin can certainly take your land-based fishing guides as well. Fruits, the Think Big certainly has the name for the big gummies. So thank you very much this evening for joining us. I really appreciate it, and we'll hopefully see you down at Complete Angler Ringwood again soon. Justin, thank you very, very much for talking some land-based stuff tonight. You know, obviously Justin Blythe Fishing Guides for fishing land-based when fishing comes back on. Anth, we fish Port Phillip, we fish offshore a bit. We love Port Phillip Bay. We've been able to prove that Port Phillip Bay has big gummies and consistent gummy catches in it, just as well as Westernport Bay. Thanks for sharing your information tonight. Thank you very much, mate. We look forward to having you on board for the next show as well. Before we go, a couple of special offers to our viewers as well this evening. We're not sponsored, but Complete Angler Ringwood does help us out to give us our prizes tonight. So we'll get the producer to think about which questions he's going to give the 2 prize packs to. And just while he's doing that, we have a couple of special offers. So first of all, we've put together an Unreal Surf Fishing Pack, which is sort of mid to high quality. We've got a Eurocore 13-foot rod, beautiful guides. It's about a 6 to 10 kilo rod setup. It's got the Shimano CI4 5500 Ultegra surf reel and 300 metres of 30-pound braid. Now, normally that sells for about $750, and it's going to be $399.99. It's under the Facebook tabs of the completeangler.net.au website. So you can go there and purchase through the website. You can have it posted out to you, or you can click and collect. And for the boat guys, we've got a Daiwa special, which is the Saltus 70M rod. It's a 10-kilo rod with a massive Saltus 8000 reel and very, very thin 80-pound braid. So it's overkill to what Shaun recommends, but it is super thin. There's going to be 300 metres of that on there with mono backing as well. You could double back that as a big shark reel, tuna reel. It's a wonderful rod, normally $740. And that one, I can't remember the discounted price because it's so ridiculous. I think it's $469. It's under the Facebook specials tab on the Complete Angler website. All right, Ben, if you want to tell us who our special question winners of the packs are, and they just need to contact me by messaging me through the Just Your Average Fisho's Facebook page, and I'll express post out these packs to you. Who have we got? We've got Jason. Do you follow the charts when fishing for gummies in terms of the moon phases and charts? That's an absolute fantastic question. And Brad Watts, any electrolysis with the tackle when you're going for gummy sharks or smooth hounds? Great question there, mate. So you have both won the Complete Angler Ringwood Gummy Shark Fishing Tackle Pack there, which comes with both a packet of the Sasami 90-kilo 3-way swivels, the regular inline swivels, the Gamakatsu inline 8.0 hooks, the Lumo sleeve, and the good old Jinkai green 80-pound braid. They're worth about $80 each pack. So congratulations. Thank you for being part of the show. As always, thank you very much, Ben, from We Are Technical, our producer, who helps large companies do things like this and big conferences. If you do have big companies that are trying to connect with your staff in this remote learning, please message me and I'll pass on Ben's details and his We Are Technical business details. It's absolutely fantastic. And next week, Same time, 8:30 Saturday. We've got the third Just Your Average Fisho show. It's a massive show, and we're going back to the roots of the Just Your Average Fishos page. We're talking all things southern calamari. Now, people might think that's an easy subject and it's easy to do. We're talking land-based, pier-based, boat-based, where to go, how to do it. And we're also going to give you some insight on some of the research that we're doing, talking big stonkers and aircraft carriers from deep water. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for all staying with us. It's a long show. Thank you for supporting Just Your Average Fishos. Like the page, share it, invite your friends. And also, don't forget to book a charter with Shaun at Think Big Fishing Charters to catch that big gummy in Westernport Bay. See you next week.